So hey guys, balance between the different roles is a topic that is woven into the very fabric of Final Fantasy XIV, and lately there has been a huge amount of controversy and problems around it. So I invited a ton of my friends to talk about this, from Sturban, who's an amazing melee player, Big Ho, who is playing Black Mage, Mars, who honestly plays everything but right now is honed in on tanks, and Lynx, who is on ranged physical DPS and will be moderating this talk. And of course, other friends are allowed to chime into this Discord call if they really want, but that's going to be our main roster for the call. And with all that said, I'm passing this off to Lynx.
I guess we will start with what do we think about the range DPS tax being so significant and why it's affecting the numbers that we just looked at? That Cole will be flashing up on screen, probably.
I mean, I'm sure we've also all seen the 6.2 adjustments, 6.21 adjustments overview, where they admit to Paladin doing less damage because they have the ability to attack from ranged, and they also admit that their encounter design, basically since the start of the Eden's Promise tier, has been significantly more house-sized bosses level. Or I guess the most extreme example would be P7, where the boss is literally the entire stage outside of very, very small parts of it. So it's really confusing that being able to hit the boss from slightly more screen real estate means that you get to do 10% less damage.
Yeah,
I think their reasoning with that as well is possibly the fact that melees have positionals. Even though positionals in this game don't necessarily matter too much to your total damage contribution when you have 99% uptime. So it's effectively a meme.
Did you play melee DPS much during the Eden's Verse tier?
I did. I actually played Ninja during it was right before Promise came out. I decided to do Oliver's on Ninja, and I thought that was one of the most fun tiers, mainly because I would actually have to optimize how am I going to move around this boss and still keep uptime and still be able to hit it.
Yeah,
And one of the
E8S.
oh yeah, sorry.
Oh no, sorry. I just wanted to say, yeah, E8S was that was something for melees. That was fierce.
Yeah, like
and
it
that
was to the point
is
where we were doing AoEs to keep uptime during the undress.
Remember, I think we were doing the E8S for Funsies group, and I think you were on tank for that, Sturban, if I recall.
I was playing Paladin.
Yeah, so how was the boss movement during those fights?
Since I'm supposed to have 100% uptime, if I don't have 100% uptime as a paladin, there's something going on. But however, since I was main tanking, I thought learning how to position the boss correctly to make sure the melees get uptime was super important, especially since Shiva actually wasn't big. She was pretty small. Compared to what we have now, where every boss has been about 3/4 of the arena.
yeah, because that's another topic that we had of on the table for discussion was the major changes that they've shifted towards from the Eden raid tiers to the Pandemonium raid tiers, and how they've really just started designing everything for melee uptime.
I think the only
Tank.
boss I can think of where boss movement has been a real concern in the last several fights has been like P3, maybe P8 one a little bit, but
I would
P3 I think
say
has like actually reasonable boss movement requirements because Phoenix is a little bit smaller than the other bosses. And also, like, there's a bit more stage to play with, and he cuts off parts of the stage, so you actually have to care about where you're putting him. But other than that, like, these bosses have been either gigantic or unmovable. Like, you
well,
look at
I think
Hegemony, and, like, the only place you can't hit Hegemony from is the actual corner of the stage.
I think one of the ones you guys did have trouble with in our last tier was P4 though, because he's just irritating to move.
Yeah, during Pinax, I think that was the one time where it was like, ugh.
That was the one time where it was super funky, but if you learned how to position them correctly, you could still retain 100% melee uptime. Like going through all of I did all of Pandemonium on melee. I cleared it on melee. I'm about to clear this tier on melee, and I cleared Promise on melee in Echo. And the entire time in Pandemonium, just regular, um, I felt that I was able to consistently keep 100% uptime no matter what strat was used, outside of one very specific Peen extract where you just leave him in the middle, which I thought was really cringe. But but in Eden's verse, I felt like I had to disconnect from the boss a lot. which I thought was fine because I would still have to learn how to play around it, but I feel like I've just been getting uptime for free.
And Big O, you played healer during that, or did you play Black Mage during Eden as well?
I actually played both. It was fine for me on Black Mage only because during the times where it was movement heavy, I had a lot of my instacast up. My triple cast, it was up for then. Swift cast, I had probably 2 or 3 polyglots ready to go for all the movement for all of that. But as a healer, because I played Astro for another group, um, it was kind of horrible for me because that was during the 2 minute window and weaving everything, trying to keep everybody topped up during that mechanic. It was just too difficult, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's a ton to go through for sure.
Like, you have to consider, like, for jobs like well, I guess healers more than casters now. But so, in funnily enough, in Eden's verse, I think a lot of groups' answers to bosses being slightly more annoying to hit in melee was just to run 2 casters. In a lot of groups, my group was not one of them, but there was a whole lot of summoner black mage on the chart. But I think from what I could tell, most people weren't too pressed about it because casters had to sit there and they had to cast, and that was like part of the tax of playing a caster. And I think for part of black mage rotation and for red mage rotation, that's still the case. But then you see one of the lowest ranking DPS jobs right now is still red mage, despite having to sit and cast for half the rotation and not even really having the flexibility of range really working in their favor in like any of these fight designs.
Because I always say it, Red Mage is the least mobile because all their mobility is tied to their damage output.
Exactly.
I mean, I have to agree with that too because with Black Mage, you can use your triple cast, which you have 2 uses of, plus your polyglot stacks, plus your fire thunder procs, plus the swift cast.
Whereas Red Mage has acceleration, swift cast, and its charge in move, which you use for melee sometimes, but you use it for damage. And nobody ever wants to use Enchanted Reprise, because why would you? It does less damage. I want to do damage.
I mean,
Exactly.
it's the equivalent of using Scathe on Black Mage, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, arguably worse because you're legitimately losing your burst window for it.
Right.
But like, so one of the reasons I liked playing tank, and like, I was learning tank a little bit during Eden, but I didn't really start playing tank heavily until Asphodelos. Was tanks and melee are kind of supposed to be like that symbiotic pair, as Sturban was mentioning, where it's like you're trying to work together to make sure that everyone who has to be in melee range of the boss can hit the boss as much as possible. And at the very least, through Asphodelos, outside of parts of P3 and P4, that didn't really feel like a part of my job. Like, Hippocampos is just this gigantic omnidirectional hitbox of death. Eric Tonios doesn't have to go anywhere in particular, because his telegraphs are like really generous, even regardless of where he's positioned. And also, they started making it so bosses just teleport to the middle of the stage. So
Yeah.
if you cockeye the boss slightly, it doesn't matter because they're back to where they're supposed to be.
Yeah, I've noticed a lot of that this past few raid tiers. It's just like, we are gonna go right back to the middle, and I'm like, okay then.
The only
But-
boss I can think of where you can actually misplace the boss and screw someone out of uptime is Carbuncle. If you don't move him middle after the tank swap, you can stop your melee from going to their tower and hitting the boss for like a global.
Yeah,
I
for
believe
one
that-
entire global.
Yeah, and I believe that can segue us into our topic of discussion. Why not just bring melee?
Because there's a
And-
5% damage buff.
Because there's a 5% damage buff if you bring a caster in a ranged.
Yep, that's pretty much my opinion at this point.
Right.
That's
And then
that's
last year was almost like it was almost irrelevant. Almost irrelevant. It was just relevant to not bring a fizz range for a little while because Machinist isn't good, still isn't good. And Dancer was not good at the moment because they got like fucked over by the stat squish.
Which left Bard by default as being like the pickable fizz range. I remember seeing the stats for week 1 clears for Asphodelos, and it
Oh,
was like
overwhelming.
95% Bard or some ridiculous amount.
It was something crazy. I can't remember the exact numbers, but my God, Bard was just leading the charge by so much. It was, I actually know so many people who were actually crunching the numbers, trying to figure out, okay, we understand it as a 5% buff, which is obviously to all stats, but would we benefit if we just dropped the Fizz ranged and like replace it with like another melee, like a samurai or something? And it's discouraging because those are actual conversations that people actually had, and I remember like being a part of those talks. Well, I mostly lurked, I need to admit, but I'm like, oh shoot, people are actually doing this math.
And then like Dancer got multiple significant buffs in a row, mostly to make the rotation not feel like janky garbage, but also like legitimate damage buffs, and now they're just ahead of Bard. So
And
my favorite fun statistic right now is even after the balance patches, the last 24 hours of Hephaestus 2 kills. So these are people who have killed the last boss of the tier, and like so it's more indicative of what's being brought at the, I guess, current highest level of Savage rating at least. And Dancer is brought almost 3 times as often as Bard is, and laughably more often than Machinist. Dancer has 216 parses in Hephaestus 2. Bard has 73, and Machinist has 16.
And yet we have people on Twitter saying that that's somehow okay, and I'm just like, are you kidding me? Like, what the hell?
No one should be discouraged from playing their job. I remember very much in Eden's Promise. I was still a big Machinist main at the very early parts of Eden's Promise, and I would often see parties locked out to Machinist players. They were not allowed to join. I saw it in Asphodelos as well, and I also saw it this tier. I've saw it multiple times this tier, and it's really discouraging as someone who used to love this job. Square refuses to buff it or give it something to be at least a little better than Dancer or differentiate itself enough to where, hey, this is gonna do a lot of damage, right? I'm supposed to be the black mage of his range, right? No, apparently you're not, and you're getting locked out of parties. There's a big problem.
Yeah, and oops, sorry, stop me if I'm going too far ahead. But like we have Black Mage that's representing the caster DPS. Summoner, you can argue definitely is a utility because it has all this mobility. It has Battle Revive. It has Phoenix, which is a powerful heal over time on the tank and then contributes to the group. You're gonna definitely see that in Variant and Criterion done. Red Mage also oozes utility, and so to me, I look at Black Mage then, and I'm like, okay, Black Mage is appropriately above them, representing high DPS for the role. So why do I see people on Twitter saying that Machinist shouldn't have high damage too? Because arguably Machinist is the Black Mage of the ranged physical. Yet Dancer, Bard, they bring utility, mobility on top of their baseline mobility. So I don't get it. Maybe I'm stupid, but what the hell?
So I guess here's a question for you, Sturban, since you've done the most like early clears of fights like this. So right now, just looking at the 90th percentile parse, which is my general baseline, Black Mage clocks in at about 600 more DPS than Summoner does, and Red Mage about 6 to 700 depending on which one you're comparing it to. In exchange for bringing absolutely zero group wide utility.
Right.
The melees are all fairly well balanced against each other in terms of damage output, and honestly, their utility is more tied to their damage anyway, with the exception of Monk maybe being a little too good because they bring Mantra and then also have absurd damage.
Can we
And
talk about why monk players don't want to use mantra?
I don't know.
oh gosh,
So how much
They
more?
should.
So how
tell me
much
why
more
I'm getting.
damage?
Tell me why I'm getting 90th percentile healing parses as Dancer when I can barely hit Curing Waltz in P5S.
So how much more damage would Machinists have to bring than the other two? So again, this is our DPS. Black Mage is bringing 6 to 700 more than its compatriots, and it's brought less than both of them actually at the moment for Hephaestus 2. How much more damage in our DPS would Machinists have to bring than Dancer and Bard to be brought to parties, and at what point would it actually be like a detriment to balance for fights?
I think machinist I think Machinist should be one tier above whatever current fourth is there. So I think Red Mage is in fourth, right?
So currently, I'm just looking at our DPS numbers. It goes in this order. It's
Mhm.
Monk, Ninja, Dragoon, Samurai, Black Mage, Reaper, Dancer, Red Mage, Summoner, Bard, Machinist.
I think they should be right under Dancer in that case then. They should deal the same amount of RDPS as Dancer, considering what Dancer actually brings to the table. Like, they have a full raid buff, 20 20 seconds long, 5%, plus they have devilment, which now gives you extra damage, by the way. a whole bunch of extra damage. And on top of that, their standard stuff, which is also 5%, and it's like glued to a single target. Like, that's the thing with Dancer. You have to glue like their buff to a single target, and of course that person is just gonna shit damage. But I think Machinist needs to be on that level or slightly below to warrant bringing it to parties. Because like, why would I bring a Machinist if I can bring a Dancer that does around the same like RDPS and will just make people just crit more? And they
And
have
also,
healing.
yeah, and I was about to say, and also have non-zero useful healing, because Cole, during P5S, I think you raided without me for one of the
Oh,
one
I've
of
tried to
our raid
PF
nights.
this. Yeah, I've tried to PF it. It's obvious when you're there versus when you're not. And I mean, obviously, like, I'm healing this tier, and so I'm feeling all the difference. Like, taking, like, going into Barbarecia, and when I notice a dancer using it, I really notice it. Going into P5, I absolutely notice it. I notice also when a bard is using Nature's Minette, that's a 20% single target healing amp during the dot, when that's on a tank. I really, really, really feel that, especially if the tank is going to be like a gunbreaker, or paladin. Paladin is Nature's Minette of paladins, please, people. It really helps. It's a huge difference. Dancers raid DP, I mean raid utility contributions are absolutely important. I will completely disagree with anyone that says, "Oh, it's only this much." I'm like, guys, you can feel that.
Right, like, I remember like doing T, and if we didn't curing waltz, like sometimes during the first phase of it where it's jagged dolls and like a whole bunch of damage is going out there, if I didn't curing waltz or improv, we would actually just die. It was that bad. But you can easily tell when, a good ranged player actually like knows how to use their utility buttons. Like, it's unmatched. Like,
Absolutely
if I was
agree.
having healing issues and I had the choice to take Dancer or Bard, and we already like try to fix the healing issues as much as we can, and obviously like the healers just can't keep up because like the fight's like messed up, like P8S Part 2. I'd rather just take the Dancer. They have Curing Waltz. That is 1,000 potency if everybody's grouped up.
Yeah, because it's also improv itself is really good, even if you just single weave it. Uh, and even if you don't get the shield on it, it's a 100 potency regen for 15 seconds.
Right.
Yeah, so that's like 500 potency, and curing Molt if you stand on is like 600, so it's like 1100 potency of healing, which is definitely non-negligible. But you also get that even if you don't like hold it, 5% baseline shield, that I can feel, and it costs the dancer absolutely nothing, dude.
Yeah. It can be tricky to re-wave in after your openers if you're in the middle of a burst phase, but I have multiple different openers where I just weave this in depending on where I want it in the fight. It's not hard to do.
So I will say though, and I guess David could also answer for this. Like, the player base is, I think, kind of inherently okay with there being a utility tax, because again, Black Mage is the least brought caster, despite having by far the most damage. Like, it's in its own tier for caster damage. It's still the least brought caster to current clears of P8S2. They're the only caster without a B-Res. So is there a point? So first of all, should Black Mage be doing more damage?
Yes.
I actually think it should at the moment just because of how everything else is, but I also think the casters should do a little bit more damage in general because I've seen like orange pursing red mages just get out damaged by a 2% tile reaper, and I'm like, no way.
God,
I
I
think
shared
the
a
whole caster role should just get a damage buff in general.
Yeah, absolutely. I was even like being shared some logs earlier, and it was literally like 95 percentile. Literally was being out DPS'd by someone who was like in like 20th percentile on a samurai, and it's like, oh wow, we're talking about someone at the absolute pinnacle of their gameplay who probably also has some lucky crits to get that kind of 95, and they're still below someone who's like barely trying. It's like, what?
So Sturban, how easy is it for you to get like 95% uptime on a melee?
I have 95% off time on every single fight this tier.
David, how does it feel having 95% uptime on a black mage right now?
It's a little taxing because, of course, I have to use all my instacast to move here and there because there's a lot of movement in the fight for P5S. It's not doable. It uses a lot of your resources and feels bad.
And just to clarify, David's a great black mage who actually uses ethereal manipulation.
Oh, don't get me started with the people who don't use that. But
How about the
yeah,
black mages that don't use mana ward?
Or Addle?
Oh,
let me tell
God.
you let me tell you this. I parsed 100% for healing just using Mana Ward twice in that fight, and I know for a fact you can use it more than twice in that fight.
You can use it up to 5 times.
There you go.
But yes,
Yeah.
it's very strong, and this just proves that people don't often know how to press their buttons.
So if anything, it seems like in these encounters, there's like more of a mobility tax than a that's actually present in the fights. Whereas the melee taxes kind of vanished off the face of the earth, and yet every melee except for Reaper does more damage than Black Mage right now.
Yeah, right now I feel like Black Mage is definitely harder to play than Melees, and I'm not saying that some people are interpreting my videos as, oh, Cole's saying Melee's easy. I'm not saying that. Like, absolutely, they're definitely not. There's a lot of
I am.
optimization.
Melee is easy.
Oh, see, you're braver than I. See that came from someone who's actually like top tier ninja. So like, I believe him, but I'm not brave enough. Oh, the Black Mage is in its own dimension right now, especially in the current tier of the game, because it's just like for anyone saying Black Mage is easy, try and take it into Barbaricha and see how many times you get whacked by everything. Like, I see a lot of people saying it's easy, and I'm like, yeah, take it into that fight. That's an extreme too. That's not even a saps, and I'm like, yo, calm down. So this is Cole from editing, and I'm actually going to skip ahead a little bit in the conversation because we do get a little bit heavy on healers here, and so we're actually talking about healers in the context of when you're going to pick a scholar versus when you're going to pick a sage, and currently we're seeing a scholar overwhelmingly being chosen over sage, and we're talking about how utility impacts the role choice that you're going to bring.
But then when it comes to gigantic bursts of damage, you'd rather bring an Astro for something like Death's Agonies or a couple of the damage events that'll happen in this tier. But then when Scholar and Sage have about the same healing, and about the same damage, the job with the unique utility is going to win all the time. Which is kind of where it comes back to Machinist and Dancer. So let's say Machinist and Dancer had identical RDPS. They don't. Dancer's about 10% ahead. But let's say they had identical RDPS. I don't think the numbers for who's brought would change.
Yeah, because if I had to choose, I would take Dancer on that. I'm currently playing Dancer, but I love Machinist. Machinist is my main whenever I actually go into Eureka. But am I going to take something that does equal amounts of damage with no utility, or take something with utility that'll help ease up my healers so they can deal more damage, or just,
So
not
the
stress?
ADPS number
I'm
for
gonna
what
take
that's
Dancer.
worth right now, Machinist does a bit more ADPS than the other casters do. They do a full 1.4k more than Dancer. Like, they do a lot. But then the RDPS, Dancer pulls very far ahead because of just how bonkers their group buffing utility is. So again, you'd have to boost Machinist ADPS by 10% just to bring their RDPS in line. I think my argument actually is you'd have to do something similar to Black Mage, where if Machinist will bring absolutely zero group utility, it legitimately needs to do a full like 500 RDPS more than Dancer, and it would still see less representation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd believe that, especially with the mobility factored in. And Event is freaking brilliant. That's an amazing ability.
So I guess this would be a question for Lynx, right? So would you prefer Machinist to just do the biggest chungus damage of all time? So like, to put in perspective, that would be putting it on about the same RDPS level as Reaper. It would probably still be brought a bit less than Dancer, but it would have enough of a damage niche to be considered being brought for just the reason of does lots of damage. Or would you want it to have more utility added to its kit and its damage number still boosted, but it probably have to be boosted to a bit less than the level of Dancer?
Personally, I would like utility for Machinist, but I'm also a person who just prefers utility. I play healers. I play dancer. I play ranged. The only range I don't play is bard, just because I don't jive with its rotation. I don't enjoy it. So I would say utility for me as a player. But for the health of the game, I would probably say just damage for Machinist.
So here's the next problem, right? Would you say that Machinist has the most complicated rotation of the 3 Fizz range?
No, I would not.
Right. We would say that's Bard probably
I'd
overall.
say it's Bard.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Probably Bard.
So this brings us to, I think, another problem where I don't think job complexity is actually really tied to the DPS a job does. And I think actually the single best example is tanks. Let's look at the tanks. So Dark Knight and Gunbreaker of the kills, they are brought 248, 240 times respectively. Warrior has been brought to 78. Again, P8 has 2 kills over the last 24 hours per FF logs I'm looking at as of 11:19 p.m. Pacific, September 16th. And then Paladin's been brought 43. For the record, at this point, the damage differential between tanks at the 90th percentile level is like 200 RDPS. If I want to look at ADPS, because again, they're tanks, they don't bring damage buffs, so we'll look at ADPS. It's a bit bigger, but it's not as bad as it was pre-patch. But Paladin is still noticeably the lowest. I think part of it is after the Phoenix's mechanic in P8S2, Paladin does not have a thing that takes advantage of the gigantic damage steroid you get after you're brought back to life, and Dark Knight and Gunbreaker definitely do. Even Warrior can hit inner release and just throw some potency at the boss's head until it falls over. But also, Paladin probably has the hardest rotation of any of the tanks, or at least the most punishing by far if you screw it up.
You also have to have a very specific GCD speed, or else you're gonna start dropping atonements, and then you just don't do damage anymore.
Did you consider critting Confettier?
And then on top of that, I will see in certain comment sections people talking about, well, Paladin and Warrior should do the least damage because they're the most defensively solid, but Dark Knight and Gunbreaker do the most damage and are also the 2 most defensively solid tanks this tier by a pretty significant margin.
Dark Knight and Raid is beautiful. I hate when people say that it's not, because it's just like, what? Dark Mind, TBN, and all the rest? Like, come on.
So the thing is, I feel like what Square Enix is doing when they put these job rotations is they equate busyness of a job with the complexity of its rotation. And I think for tanks, that is absolutely not the case. Dark Knight's rotation is incredibly basic. You just kind of have to mash your face on your keyboard every 2 minutes and like not drift your OGCDs. Paladin, you have to do rocket science, brain surgery, and outer space to do less damage. And also you die to a stiff breeze because Holy Sheltron sucks this tier, and half the things in this tier you can't use Hallowed Ground on. And then you're supposed to be allowed to hit the boss from far away, but the boss is the size of a hotel building, so that doesn't really matter. So I don't know.
And that's from the devs on mouth too.
Right. It's like, so if you're going to have like Machinists do a bunch of damage, you would arguably need, I think what Square would want, like based on their current design philosophy for the tanks, is you would have to make them busier outside of their hypercharge window, or you'd have to give them more stuff to do during their hypercharge window, or you would have to make them just overall faster somehow. And I don't know how much more complexity Machinist needs added to its rotation. But I feel like that's the only way Square is going to give it enough damage to basically be like at Reaper level, which is I think what at least I established it would need to be at to even consider being brought.
See, I'm gonna say something that might be controversial, which I honestly think that Machinist has far more complexity in its timings than like Samurai's rotation, because with Samurai, with the removal of Chitin, which I know a lot of people want to keep, like it's basically like, okay, you have these set buttons, and as soon as they're off, you just use them all at once, and they're every 2 minutes. You basically are just automatically aligned. You just use them when off cooldown. And I mean, Machinist has the same thing to a certain degree, but there is a little bit more to do with the timings, and especially their opener. If you start off with like a wonky wildfire, you can definitely dismantle it. So I don't really think that complexity is something that's so much of a factor, because if it was, it's kind of like what we were getting at earlier. It's like Black Mage should just be so much above every other DPS, at least in my opinion, because it's just like, why is a samurai, which I could take into fights and definitely do kind of with I don't want to say it this way, but like 50% less brain power than when I take a Black Mage into it. Like, why is the samurai still above Black Mage then? If it was a complexity argument.
Yeah.
Oh shoot, my
It's
recording
because
just went
melee players are babies. I will say that. Melee players are babies. They cry all the time and they want to be spoiled by the dev team because they think their job is the hardest thing in the world. But let me tell you, every single melee is easy. The hardest one is probably Dragoon, mainly because recovering on that is really bad.
Yeah,
Did
the
your
recovery's
recording go
bad.
out, Cole?
Yeah, I think it did for like a little bit when I was saying my little blurb, but it's okay. We can keep
Okay.
going.
Okay.
Okay, so we didn't miss Sturban's hot takes.
No, we
Great.
got Sturban's hot take.
Yes, every single melee player is a baby, myself included. I cry, I throw up every single time I have to disconnect from the boss for more than 2 GCDs. And you
I've
know
been
what?
there. I
Yeah.
have pulled a boss 2 inches further north than it was supposed to be when we were raiding together. I have heard it in the chat.
I was literally crying. I was like, "There's no way you could do this. How could you do this to me? You're a friendly Dragoon player." At the time, I think I was playing Dragoon at the time anyway.
You are playing Dragoon. Yes, it was
Yeah.
it was Hesperos to Act 1. He's
Yeah.
pulled very slightly north, and it happened to be north south.
Mhm. And you know what I would do? I would greed. I would greed the entire time. I don't care. I would have actually gone to your spot if I could. If I could thrust you out of your spot to keep my spot, I would have done it.
Is melees are the epitome of move I'm gay.
No, like literally, that's it.
Oh no.
Like I'm telling you, like the healer players are the bottoms. The fizz range players are the switches. The melee players, they're bratty twinks.
Oh no.
Oh god.
So Big Ho, what's stopping you from playing melee for a tier?
Wow.
No,
That's
not for that reason. Because you would work about half as hard, and you would do like the same damage.
because my brain's not made for melee brain. Although when I did level up all my melees, it was easier to understand this time around than when it was back in Shadowbringers. I think it's because of the whole entire 2-minute shenanigan things, but it's easier for me to pace myself with trying to do melee when I leveled it up.
I also feel like you haven't played on Endwalker boss yet in melee, where the fact that it's in melee doesn't actually have a bearing on whether you can hit it.
Yeah,
That
definitely.
too. Because I remember back in Shadowbringers when I tried to do melee, I leveled up my samurai specifically for this to see how I would do with melee. It was a pain to have uptime. I was chasing the boss everywhere because of how small the hitbox was. And then with the hitboxes now being the size it is, I don't think it should be that difficult. I mean, I know I'm not gonna play the same level as Sturban's gonna play, but at least I'll have some sort of like what's the word? I'll be useful to the group. There you go.
You would be, I guarantee you would work half as hard, and you would do the same damage.
hmm
Like this is not an exaggeration. This is not me insulting your black mage. This is just the way the game is designed right now.
I
Oh
mean,
no, I
numerically,
completely
yeah.
understand because as Black Mage, I have to time each and every one of my GCDs to make sure I can get the most out of it as Black Mage. And it changes every time my freaking spell speed goes up, and it pains me most of the time.
Yeah, even me, it's just like if someone asked me what DPS would I swap to, it would easily be either ninja or samurai without even a hesitation in my mind. It's just they are clearly the highest reward for the inputs right now.
Yeah.
And it's not me saying ninja's easy, but
It
it's
is.
me saying, oh, you can say that. I'm not brave enough, but for me, I just love them. I've found myself being very effective when I take them into content, even without gear. Like I've been looking at what I've been doing, and I'm like, oh wow, that makes my like other roles just look completely awful. If it wasn't that I loved healing, I'd 100% be Samurai and Ninja. And then people go around and then they're just asking on Party Finder, why is it that we have the melee slots filled? Why is it that recruiting non-melee DPS is so hard? And it's like, guys,
I want to do a big number.
yeah, exactly. It's just like even in dungeon content, it's just faster. Oh
See,
no.
if we buff Machinist, the dancer players and the bard players, they'll be very sad that they're
See,
getting out damaged by a class with no utility.
And a
See,
gun.
yeah, that makes me so mad though. Like I'm reading these posts on Twitter and it just looks like the same gatekeeping BS that I've seen before. And it's just like, okay, you with utility and extra mobility abilities above and beyond are going to somehow feel like you're being wronged because a class with fewer mobility options than you and no utility wants to do like even as much damage as you. It should be doing more, but it's just like people are just like it shouldn't even be doing the same amount of damage. And I'm like, what kind of mental gymnastics are you doing to arrive at that conclusion? It has less mobility, yes, less utility. So why would you take it? Even if it was doing the same damage, like we discussed before, you wouldn't. I don't get it.
And the major philosophy behind Square's uh, balancing with this game is that every class can clear a tier. Every class should be able to clear the content. But
Right, and
the
technically they
gatekeeping
all
is
can.
making it very hard to do that.
Week 1, there were clears of the tier on Machinist, but there were no clears of the tier with a Machinist and a double caster comp and a Paladin.
Yep.
Exactly.
And a warrior.
You should
Oh.
be able to clear week 1 to 2 with any composition as long as it's a valid composition with the 5% buff.
Mm-hmm.
You should be able to, and the class balance should only be 1 to 3% between rolls, not 10.
Well, yeah, and that's the problem that we're facing. It's just like, why would I myself go Samurai and Ninja as like off DPS specs? And it's quite simple. It's like even when you're looking at Barbaricha Extreme, and it's just like, and this is going to be a peace and love moment, but I hear a lot of content creators say, "Oh, I've never seen Enrage there," and I'm just like, you're getting your community, which is very good players, to like group up with you, and you're going into PF with a stacked group. I have gone into those groups, and I can't tell you how many times on even Barbaricha that I have seen Enrage. I have literally died to Enrage on her at least 30 times. And this is because I'm dumb and I go on a healer. Now, if I went on a Samurai or a Ninja, I guarantee we probably would have met that. And that's actually was my experience last year as I was just redoing all the Savage fights. I'm just like, oh wow. Like on DPS, when I go on DPS, I rarely see it, but I just hate how people are like, oh, it's only a Savage thing. And I'm like, no, on pretty much any fight with an Enrage timer, if you're going to Party Finder, you're going to feel this.
I think it's
more
also the
enrages. Oh,
case.
yeah,
Oh,
sorry.
go ahead.
Sorry, but no, I was gonna say I see more enrages in like literally any like actually, let me throw this out there. I've seen more enrages in like any EX fight that I have in Ultimate PF. And I did a lot of Ultimate PF, just mainly to feel something, but still.
Yeah, and I think that just speaks for it's just like for certain pockets, you're gonna get more experienced players, in which case things feel a bit better and there's a little bit more leniency. But where you have to, I'm trying to think of the polite way of saying it, where you need to gently pack with bubble wrap and styrofoam the group in luggage bags and haul them, you need a little bit more care.
Thinking about that one ninja that said he likes to use trick attacks sometimes, and that's when I said I'm never doing EXs in Party Finder ever again.
Gosh.
Or the one tank that said, I don't like using tank invulns because I don't like it when other people can't handle doing it correctly. In a video game where tank invulns are like ostensibly pretty good.
Define correctly, exactly.
Using it on the stack, Tank
Yeah.
Buster, and Barbaricha.
Yeah, exactly. I just look at those tanks, I'm like, what?
Would you like to heal one tank or two tanks?
None.
Or no tanks if
No
the Dark
tanks.
Knight or the Gunbreaker or the Paladin did it?
Cardia it up, or EOS.
Well, I think we've gone through all of our topics. So to summarize, DPS tax for casters and machinists kind of hurts the game.
And they
I
really
do
shouldn't be
believe
there.
so. I believe so, because it's just like as we got into it, you're gonna see enrages, and it's just like it's nice to say that you don't see them when you have a stacked up group, but it's just not realistic, and that's why people don't want to play these roles, because they try them, then they're seeing enrage, and then they swap, and then they're not seeing enrage, and it's like this visceral feeling where it's like, okay, I spent 8 minutes just to see enrage versus cleared in that same 8 minutes. It's a it's not a hidden secret at this point. It's very on the nose.
And for people who are like worried, well, this will only affect, week 1 or week 2s or ultimates, why do you care? It doesn't. A lot of people's consumption of video games, not just Final Fantasy, but like Hearthstone, Street Fighter, uh, any other game that you can think of where like people will play it on the internet, League of Legends. The things that happen in high end play, those tend to be most of the content creators or people who play at a somewhat high level. That trickles down because that's what people see and they assume, oh, that must be what's good in the video game. Like if a deck is good in Hearthstone, it doesn't just affect the top legend ladder, it affects everyone because 300,000 people on the internet see it on YouTube and be like, I'm going to play that deck on ranked now.
Yep, there's a website, HS Replay. You can literally copy paste the deck, literally.
And that's why I always go back to the story of that world first raider. I don't remember which tier it was. Maybe it was for one of the ultimates, but he finished with Dark Knight whenever everybody thought Dark Knight was awful.
That was
And
Ace, I think, the guy who got world first on Astra this tier in Abyssos.
Yes. And he just said, I just like playing Dark Knight. And I simply think that should be the way it is. Play what you like.
I agree, but also please buff Machinist. Please, for the love of God, I want to be able to play my job without being locked. Please, for the love of God, buff the class.
So
Please, I
here's
love
my
it.
last question for Sturpin in particular.
Yeah,
Would you be happier if bosses were like half as big?
I want bosses that are as big as the players. Like that's a really hot take, but I'd actually enjoy a boss
A
for
one pixel
for one.
hitbox?
Yeah, yeah. I want one that's the size of the player. Like you did Cape Western, right? Like
Yes.
make the boss around the size of like the dude you're fighting there. That I would actually really enjoy that for a tier. That would be really refreshing.
All right. Well, does anybody else have anything else to end at the end?
Not
Buff
I.
Black Mage.
I think Black
Unironically,
Mage
yes.
does deserve him.
I'll say
I-
this: melee players, one day you're gonna learn. You're gonna learn one day. You're gonna learn. As a ranged player coming to melee, I understand everything now. No melee player should have privileges anymore.
If you die on melee, it's because you're bad at the video.
I would yes, only if it was Eden's verse. I let it slide. That tier was a little hard, but that's what you need. You need these fights to be harder so you can get better. If Square Enix is casually handing you 100% uptime, even in the ultimates, like I've never had like super duper forced downtime in an ultimate unless it was a mechanic, like a really like big mechanic, not like just the boss, like moving from like point A to point B for like a raid wide or something. You know what I mean, right?
Something where the boss is actually untargetable.
Yes, yeah. It's kind of funny too. In DSR, all the points where the boss like becomes untargetable, when they come back, you either have your 2 minutes up or you have your 1 minute up, so it doesn't even matter.
Oh no,
It's really hilarious.
10 globals outside of burst. What will I do?
Oh no, I have my burst ready the second the boss comes back down. Whatever will I do?
Well, I think that's a good place to end it. What do you say to that, Cole?
I say that that's good. You know what? I think that there were a lot of great points, and so don't regret it.
All right, awesome.
Awesome. So I'm going to close up the record now. See you all. Thank you all for tuning in. And yeah,